See, okay, let me ask you this question. Before you got involved with Scientology, if someone asked you how old you were, what would you have told them?
I would have said 28,
Okay.
29. Right?
After you got involved with Scientology and you learned the truth, how old would you have told someone you were if you...
76 trillion years.
I'd like to introduce you to Steven Fishman, the man who is about to show us all just how deep cult indoctrination can run. Hi, I'm Liz Gale, your friendly and messy third-generation ex-Scientologist. You got that part right, ex-Scientologist. My family has spent more than 7 decades and 4 generations in Scientology. I've watched family member after family member give their time, money, and even their children to an organization that can never seem to get enough of any of those things. Some call Scientology a religion, and others call it a cult. I am in the distinct position of calling it my childhood, where bedtime stories consisted of government conspiracy theories, secret experiments, aliens, metaphysics, and, of course, pseudoscience. Since leaving Scientology, I've done a lot to deprogram and deconstruct my bizarre upbringing. I've tried to work out what was real history, what was fable, and what was pure lunacy. For example, is Earth really a prison planet? Are there really memory implant stations on Mars? Has the Galactic Confederacy dispatched a fleet of spaceships to save us yet? Every once in a while along this quest, I stumble upon a new piece of the puzzle, a clue to the world I was raised in, something that gives context to the secret scriptures, confidential teachings, and occult practices I was spoon-fed as a child. The following interview is a perfect example of how fanaticism can be preyed upon and how misinformation turns from lore into fact in a vacuum. I'd like to introduce you to Steven Fishman, the man who is about to show us all just how deep cult indoctrination can run. Steven says that Scientology put him through thought reform and ordered him to assassinate church enemies. He also says that he is the true father of Jesus Christ and that he once spent 10,000 years polishing a single brick on a faraway planet. Either way, he appears to be a true believer. Scientologists and ex-Scientologists alike tend to agree Stephen is a nutcase. And yet, I can't help but wonder how much of these same beliefs shaped my family's own legacy and lore. How much of his belief system made its way into my bedtime stories. Join me as we watch this vintage footage. Together, bit by bit, we'll try to break down fact from fiction, sanity from insanity, and make sense of the what in the world I was born into. Okay, just kidding. I'm not qualified to do that. But we're gonna give it a shot. So hey, let's get started.
Living true, living free, brimming with creativity.
Okay, buckle up. We're diving into the truly unhinged saga of Steven Fishman, ex-Scientologist, convicted fraudster, lawsuit magnate, and author of the weirdest book Scientology never wanted you to read. As one ex-member said, it's mostly hookers and poop. Of course, this only made me want to read it more. And I'm about 30 pages in. I can confirm they were correct. If this tells you anything, Steven Fishman was a unique character. In the 1980s, he was deep in Scientology, auditing like crazy, reading every book and listening to every lecture he could get his hands on. Fast forward to the early 90s, and Fishman gets nailed by the feds for securities fraud. Classic white-collar stuff. But here's the twist. He claims Scientology made him do it. Yup. He says the church brainwashed him into committing fraud so he could pay for more courses. Because what better way to reach spiritual enlightenment than defrauding investors? This wouldn't be the first or the last time that a high-ranking rich Scientologist was convicted of a Ponzi fraud scheme, but that's a story for another day. So, Fishman sues Scientology. They sue him back, and suddenly we're in lawsuit limbo. Enter the Fishman Affidavit. This affidavit includes confidential Scientology materials, including the top highest level OT operating Thetan levels sold for thousands of dollars. Scientology freaks the hell out, sues everyone to oblivion for publishing their sacred sci-fi secrets. But by then, it's too late. The affidavit is online, the internet is laughing, and Xenu is trending. Meanwhile, Fishman publishes The Time Track of Steven Fishman, a 400-page spiritual fever dream where he shares his past lives, cosmic adventures, and other episodes of what can only be described as a cross between L. Ron Hubbard, Scientology founder, and the Twilight Zone, but set in outer space. Except nobody really knows if Fishman was telling the truth about any of it. If it was some elaborate scheme to sue Scientology and get rich, or he was just riding the crazy train. Okay, well, that's a hell of an intro to what we're about to learn is a hell of a guy. And all aboard the crazy train. Choo choo, let's go. Special thanks to Mark Bunker from Xenu TV. He's been taking all of these old vintage interviews and just things that would be lost otherwise and been upgrading them to 4K. And this is one of those examples. So just want to say thank you.
Okay, Steve.
Okay.
Let me ask you this question. Before you got involved with Scientology, if someone asked you how old you were, what would you have told them?
I would have said 28, 29. Right?
After you got involved with Scientology and you learned the truth, how old would you have told someone you were if you...
76 trillion years.
Whoa, so that escalated quickly. Yes, Steven said before Scientology, he would have been 29, 28 years old. But after Scientology has opened up his mind and his understanding, he realizes now he is 76 trillion years old. This is a great way to just dive right into Scientology beliefs. Yes, in Scientology, the belief is we are immortal beings and we have bodies, right? Kind of like an avatar. And we've been floating around different galaxies and universes for, in Steven's case, 76 trillion years. That's a long time, right? That's a long time to wrap one's head around. I don't even know if my human puny brain can comprehend how much time that really is. But I think it speaks to the mindset, the outlook of the average Scientologist. And in my case, being born into and growing up in Scientology, this absolutely was taught to me like fact. Like we've all lived many, many lifetimes in many, many bodies, forms, existence, places over trillions and trillions of years. Now, I realize we're like 10 seconds in here, but I just want to point out that when we're talking about kids, me, okay, kids, my friends, people growing up, and we're all being told that we're trillions of years old, that's where the idea of adults in little bodies, you may have heard this idea, kids growing up in Scientology. It's one of the biggest criticisms that I have with Scientology. You might have heard this concept before, adults in little bodies. It's been covered on television shows, documentaries, and many, many ex-Scientologists born in, like myself. In case you didn't know, there's like a ton of us out here screaming at the top of our lungs that this didn't work for us or for our parents or whatever. That's another story. There's this concept that because we're 76 trillion years old, we're just coming back after a death and we're being reborn. But with Scientology, we're going to remember everything. And so, in that same way, we are held accountable for everything. And the expectation of, an adult is one thing, but the expectation of a 76 trillion year old goes above and beyond. In fact, Scientology's naming ceremony for, a newborn child is basically to say like, hey, what's up? Welcome back. We're going to take care of you for a while. Like things are going to be cool. You're going to do Scientology again. We missed you. Let's see what Steven has to say about what he's been up to the last 76 trillion years.
Now, I should point out that that's 76 trillion Earth years. But there's different kinds of time. There's linear time, there's chronological time, there's three-dimensional time. On some of my auditing folders, they go back to quadrillions and quintillions of years.
Okay, I'm not going to pretend like I understand what this linear versus chronological time is. He'll get into that a little bit later. His auditing files, his auditing folders, these would be all of the written down processes that he did in Scientology, exploring these memories, exploring his past, right? And of course, he doesn't remember this. He is using a Scientology tool, an electric device that Scientology says can essentially read his spiritual energy and prove to him that this really happened. But again, he'll get into that as well. Let's keep going.
Some of my auditing folders, they go back to quadrillions and quintillions of years, because there's a formula to convert that to Earth years. I just wanted to let you know so that there wouldn't be any problem with that.
Okay.
Well, I'm not sure I can even have a problem with that because I don't even understand that. But I love the fact that there is some science to it. And that's a common theme throughout all of Scientology, right? When you're in the bubble, it's science. And so there's formulas and mathematics and statistics, and there's these proof through electronic feedback. And essentially what that creates is an inarguable, authoritative cult. As a side note, right now, at this very moment, just sort of flashing before my eyes are times that I, as a young child, used the same electronic devices, and it told me what my past lives were. So he seems crazy, but so far, common practice. And yes, so far is like 12 seconds, but still, let's keep going.
Just as a way of our getting started, can you tell me some of the things that you've discovered about your history, both in this life and in your past lives, that came up in the course of your learning about yourself through Scientology?
Well, the first thing I discovered is that I was not a body, that I was a spiritual being, or a thetan operating a body.
Okay, that is, again, a fundamental belief in Scientology. That is one of the basics. It is probably the most basic. And if you start thinking in context of us being spiritual beings as opposed to being our bodies, that's the great first step into, frankly, understanding how far we can go with this. This is a man who went all in on Scientology to the point of being willing to harm his fellow human beings for the cause. I would argue that creating a larger time frame, making this lifetime more inconsequential, is a good first step in manipulating someone to doing something crazy. But hey, what do I know? I was just raised in a cult. All right, let's keep watching.
Found out more about who I am, what I am, where I've been all this time, why I'm here.
Okay, I got to admit that those questions he asked are religious questions. And Scientology is a business, a cult, a self-help group. And those questions he's asking are the roots of a religion. And I find it really, really, really interesting that L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, early on was a science fiction writer, did the occult, did black magic, worked with some of the early founders of NASA. He worked in intelligence agencies, all kinds of crap. At one point, he had the famous quote, "If you want to get rich, start a religion." And it seems that from that point on, L. Ron Hubbard spent a lot of his time trying to answer those types of questions and thus shoving it forward toward tax exemption.
Much of the data that I know is in this library. There's a tape called The Roll of Earth, which talks about this planet as a prison planet, and that we are here because it's a dumping ground. We're the undesirables, and this is a place where no one else of any knowingness really wants.
Okay, that right there. All right, listen. That is what Scientology taught me. And I didn't take that course. I didn't listen to exactly the lecture he's talking about, but you know damn well I'm going to after I'm done with this whole thing. I have to now. The role of Earth, I did grow up believing that the Earth was a prison planet, and that what happens to us is that in between lives, we get bumped out to these implant stations, Mars, Venus, dark side of the moon. I know this is starting to sound very weird. Okay. This guy and I went through the 80s thinking the same thing. Shit. And just to finish that thought, after the implant stations where you are like electronically stimulated with memories, Steve here is going to confirm whether my recollection of this is correct. But my hypothesis is that he is going to at some point tell us about the implant stations, wiping our memories from each lifetime and booting us back down here to Earth. We're like the early colonial Australia of outer space. We're, as he said, the undesirables. And you know what? I've never felt so seen. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Let's keep going.
For undesirables, for nonconformists, for the artistic, for criminals, for deviants, different things like that.
Huh. That's weird. I mean, like, come on, nonconformists, raise your hand. That's me. Artists, raise your hand again. That's me. And then the undesirables. And then we go into the criminals. That's a hell of a jump, Steve, but okie dokie.
What was the mechanism through which it happened?
Well, through auditing, through training, through data, listening to tapes, reading books.
Okay, Steve just described there like exactly what Scientology is, what you do when you do Scientology, right? You are doing courses, you are doing training, auditing. In the way he's describing it, auditing is when you receive the spiritual counseling, right? They're focused on your time track, your 76 trillion or quadrillion or quintillion years. Much of the training is taking the courses that teach you then how to audit somebody else. And in order to get into that headspace, that sort of personality, there's a lot of training that goes up into essentially making a robot out of you. And there's a reason for that. It's because in these auditing sessions, someone is going to sit across from you and tell you what they were up to 76 trillion years ago. And you need to have a straight face and you need to continue to be the auditor about it. And that takes training. It also takes training to read the device that is going to essentially bypass all consent and all agency and tell Mr. Fishman here exactly what he's been up to. You might think this is so freaking wild, but so far, this is spot on. This is spot on with my experience growing up in an extremely fanatical Scientology home. All right, let's go.
Proving a lot of it out on the meter, having it proved out on the meter, having verified some things that I thought could really be. I mean, I never knew why I didn't like certain things. In the physical universe, certain images annoyed me, and
like what, for example?
Well, first I'll give you the earliest example. When I was 6 months old, I refused to drink milk, and of course, in those days, the milk was in glass bottles. They weren't in plastic bottles. And when I was 6 months old, I would take the bottle and smash it against the wall every time my mother would give me a bottle of milk. Yet I would drink apple juice, orange juice. I love orange juice to this day. But milk smashed against the wall. And my mother eventually gave up. She went into apathy over it. She just didn't give me milk anymore because she didn't want to clean up the glass. But I often wondered how a 6-month-old child who couldn't even speak yet would know to that extent why milk was so bad.
Okay.
And I found out in Scientology that I had been poisoned by a wife who gave me milk to drink, and it was poisoned milk.
Oh. I did not see that coming. Okay. All right, Steve, where are we going with this? It's always a woman's fault. Okay, here we go.
I found out in Scientology that I had been poisoned by a wife who gave me milk to drink, and it was poisoned milk. And that incident carried forward into this lifetime, and naturally I didn't want any part of it.
When were you poisoned?
I was poisoned, actually, you have to understand a little bit about time. And in order to answer the question,
tell us about time.
Chronologically, it was in time, my last life. But it was actually 8 lifetimes ago. Because when you die and you drop your body, you do a shift in space to the between lives area.
Okay.
And you go through a series of very suppressive implants, which I can describe to you in great detail if you want me to.
Whoa.
But I want to get to the point of what I'm saying. You know, then I can go back to this.
Okay.
It would be non-sequitur if I did it the other way. Anyway, when you come back to the physical universe, you don't only do a shift in space, but you do a shift in time. And there is no guarantee that if you dropped your body in 1988, you would come back in 1989.
Okay, so it was 1 lifetime ago, but it was really 8 lifetimes ago. All right. I think I'm tracking here. Now, this is actually a little bit hazy, a little bit new to me, that you could be, so you could pass away in the Roman time, but then wake up in 2025 with a new baby body, right? And then you could pass away in 2025, and then your next life could be in the 1600s. Wait a minute. Now I'm confused. Okay, let's see how he explains this.
You could just as easily come back in the year 1200.
Okay, yeah.
Or the year 3000.
Oh.
Actually, there is a chronological time stream or range where the between lives area is set up where for 3,048 years in either direction.
That's such a weirdly specific number, 3,048, that all of our spirits would be sort of defined by that time continuum is very bizarre and interesting to me. If you subscribe to the Matrix concept, that this whole world is a simulation, that we're sort of a video game, then yeah, you could just reboot at different points along the track. I feel like this is getting really interesting. I cannot wait to hear what he is going to say next, to be honest.
You could actually come back earlier or later, or you could come back in simultaneous time where you could physically be operating 2 bodies at once without knowing it. Let's say you died in 1988. You could come back to life in 1962. And you could, for the period from 62 to 88, you're physically operating 2 bodies.
Oh, okay. This hits really weirdly close to home. So he is saying, let's all get this straight. He's saying that a spirit could inhabit 2 bodies at once, right? So like 2 players in the video game. The reason that I know about this, the reason that I grew up believing this, is I had a friend who had seizures. And the explanation given not only to her, but to her friends around her was that she had 2 bodies. And something was happening with her when she was like switching or doing something, and this seizure was happening with one of her bodies. So sadly, the treatment really did consist of like a spiritual treatment, when in reality, she had meningitis, spinal meningitis. And eventually that was caught, and she is grown and healthy. And I'm so glad for that. But frustrating to go through that. And so that's immediately what I think of when I hear him say that. I've never given much thought to myself being 2 spirits at this, like 2 bodies at the same time when I was growing up. But I have also heard that as being an explanation for some sorts of really intense psychiatric conditions like schizophrenia, like acute schizophrenia. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's keep going. Why not?
You could, for the period from 62 to 88, you're physically operating two bodies as a Thetan, but in your own time track, one is really before the other in sequence. But in the chronological time track, which has nothing to do with real time, you're physically operating two bodies. For example, when Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, simultaneously someone else invented it in Europe. And when Bessemer invented the steel process, a guy named, I forget the name, but there was someone else who invented steel at the same time. I have it, it's in one of my books.
Book by whom?
By L. Ron Hubbard. And what actually was, these were the same person.
What
They were the same person?
But operating two different bodies.
What?
Whoa. Okay. Alexander Graham Bell was what? Okay, wait, what? First of all, let's back up. He said you could coexist having a body from 1962 to 1988. So that means that there are some people who believe that kids born into Scientology are actually alive old timers. Wait. I don't know, guys. We got to come back to that one. We got to get, or maybe not. Let's just move on from that one. Fuck. Okay. And Alexander Graham Bell. He said that another dude was also Alexander Graham Bell, but both of them had the idea for the telephone at the same time. So one spirit, two bodies, same invention. That's crazy. It reminds me actually of when they talk about muses in artistry. They talk about how you better catch an idea or even like a poem or a story, an inspiration from the wind, because it'll move on to the next artist. I don't know if I subscribe to that, but I've heard that before. And this is kind of a really weird way to look at that in the sense of, okay, if you don't do it, then your other you is going to do it. What? Okay.
It's actually a tape. It's a tape called The History of Man, which I have. I
That's
know
a
exactly
gem.
where to find it on the cassettes. It's the third tape in the series called The History of Man. I know my library.
Okay, what
Wasn't I saying something before we did this? Oh yeah. So you could actually conceivably come back in a different time zone. So when I say it was my last lifetime when I got poisoned with the milk, chronologically it would have been because it happened in the 40s after World War II. I had been in the concentration camp. My name was Mordecai Kusvitz.
Okay, wait. What? Hold on. This guy is something else. Names? Okay.
I had been in the concentration camp. My name was Mordecai Kusvitz, and I lost 4 children. I lost my wife, and then I got married. I went after the war. I was the only one in the family that survived. I had a lumber mill in that lifetime in Poland, in Katowice, Poland.
Katowice.
And I survived the war, and I went to Tahiti. And I met a girl there named Gabrielle Johannes on the island of Moorea. And she was much younger than me. I was like 53 at the time, and she was like in her early 30s. And she was unfaithful, and she poisoned me with milk. Now, you know, it's a funny thing.
What?
3 years ago, part of my training in Scientology was to go back to that island and find this lady who is now an old lady.
You found her?
And I found her.
You found what's her name?
I found Gabrielle Johannes. She was living in Papeete. And I found her and I confronted her with this and I said, you're not going to believe this, but were you ever married to a Mordecai Kusvitz? And she was like taken aback, you know. And I finally, after explaining what had happened, and I had been in Scientology and this is what had been transpiring, she hugged me, I forgave her, and everything was fine. And now, I did a partial release on the lock of milk.
I only have one question. Does he like milk now? Actually, I'm just kidding. I have like 500 million questions, but I don't. Let's just keep going. Let's just keep going.
Okay, well, when you have a lock, it's a chain of incidents It's not like an engram because you're not feeling pain and unconsciousness, but just the very thought of milk turning me off. Like if I couldn't watch a television commercial for milk because I would get physically sick. I would experience somatics. But now I can watch that commercial. I still won't drink the stuff.
Oh, it doesn't
But
drink it.
I actually de-intensified the effect of the milk by actually confronting the incident.
Exactly how did you do?
Well, there you have it. That's a Scientology story, success story if I ever heard one. Okay. He went through all that. In his story, he got on a damn airplane and flew to Tahiti and found some old woman and confronted her about having poisoned him in a past life. And they were like, ha ha ha, and had a hug and a laugh about it. And all of that got him to the point where he still can't drink milk, but he's not revolted when he sees it on a commercial. Worth it? I don't know. You tell me. You tell me.
Do that in that particular case?
In that particular case, by actually going back and confronting the death, confronting the place where it happened, and then confronting the murderer, the lady who did it, and forgiving her and telling her, I'm still okay and you're okay and we're friends, it de-intensified the anxiety, shall we?
I'm okay. You're okay. You poisoned me with milk. It's okay. Happy ending.
It reduced the charge of the incident. And
side note, charge is the electrical energy that they believe that they're reading when they're like reading your soul with the meter.
And, you know, it was a great thing to do. It was part of my handling in Whole Track was to go back and actually locate this incident, locate the person, de-intensify the charge on the incident. And that was a major breakthrough I had in knowing with total causation that I really lived before.
I'm not going to lie. If I used a Scientology e-meter to tell me that I was poisoned in a past life by some woman, I've already forgotten her name, but he knows, and where she's at, enough to go to Tahiti and find her and like make it right, I would probably be a hardcore believer too. And I think this is really important to point out because once you feel so strongly the way that Steven obviously feels, everything else that comes after that is going to be unquestionable, right? Like if L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology were right about this, then are they right about everything? And how far does a member go with this indoctrination? How do they know even when they're about to step over the deep end?
But there weren't a lot of things that had happened on the Whole Track you couldn't go back and actually confront in this
Of course
body.
not, but that you do it on a gradient scale.
Okay.
You do it on a gradient scale with current lifetime so that you could then not have to Q&A with the reality of it.
Mm-hmm.
You follow what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Don't you feel lucky you have a Scientology translator like you do now? So what he's basically saying, he's like, no, you can't go back in your whole track. That's your whole 76 trillion, quintillion, whatever, the whole time you've been a spirit. You can't go back and find every wife that's poisoned you. There's just too many. So instead, what he's saying is that no, but you can do it with this lifetime. And once you get that certainty, you stop Q&Aing, questioning and answering. Basically, you stop questioning, period, whether the tech works. So I think he's saying that this was a turning point for him in that he no longer questioned. He had no more doubts. He was 100% in, and not just in from a 28-year-old's perspective, but this is where the mindset where people now will sign a billion-year contract, or they will give their entire lifetime or their entire fortune to Scientology, because in context, it's nothing. This is the beginning of fanaticism. Well, I mean, he's deep into it, but these thoughts, getting there, it's how it all starts.
Now, but how would you de-intensify on things that had happened in past lives where you couldn't do it in this body?
You exteriorize.
What do you mean by that?
Look at this lawyer I got. You have to leave your body. You have to be outside of the body.
And there we have it. Gosh, that's the end all be all of Scientology, isn't it? Exteriorization. That was one of their many, many, many selling points to people who believe in things like remote viewing or basically just astral projection, traveling outside of your body as a spirit. And in Scientology, the native state is the spiritual state. And so, as a human in this physical world, we're really limited. You know what? I think this is a great place to stop for this episode. And my mind is buzzing. I absolutely love this. I love breaking it down and understanding where did these crazy beliefs came from. He read them in the same books my parents read, the same books my grandmother read, the same books my uncles, my cousins, and honestly, sadly, the next generation in my family is reading today. I recently found out that a fourth generation Scientologist is signing her Sea Org contract in my family line. And I'll tell you, you don't just wake up one day and sign a billion-year contract. You think like Steve here, and you had someone like Steve explaining the world to his children, who explained it to their children, who explained it to you. Maybe what I'm doing here today isn't so far off from what Steve said that he did. This is my Tahiti, you guys. And while Steven Fishman can't, apologizing for poisoning me, not with milk, but with tech, and maybe that's a little too far, but you get the drift. I guess I'm just gonna have to practice my exteriorization. We will meet yet one day, my friend. I'm gonna get you, sir. I'm gonna find you in some spiritual alley, and we're gonna talk about this. Holy cow, you guys! I feel like that was a lot. Was that a lot for you? That was a lot for me. Before I go, I want to leave you just a little tidbit. We were talking about exteriorization, having the spirit be outside the body, remote viewing, astral projection. Go ahead and Google Project Stargate and see how some very, very top level Scientology trained, audited folks worked with the CIA for decades in a very confidential astral projection government experiment. And hey, that is a bedtime story, I was told, and it's true. So there. Okay. That's all I've got for you. Thank you for coming down. Whatever the hell this was, I almost am embarrassed to tell you that we made it through 10 minutes of Steven's interview, and it's 3 hours and 30 minutes long. I do have the attention span of a goldfish. I may lose interest in this, but I doubt it. I know coming up are some pretty juicy little past life details that I don't know if I'm punking, I'm mocking, or if I believe it, but it's really entertaining. So I'm going to keep going. Please give this video a like, a share, put in the comments if you give a shit, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you. Bye.
She knows herself, she finds her way. Through art and joy, she shapes each day, crafting beauty from the past.